The doctor didn't sugarcoat it. You've got a hernia, bigger than I expected. Surgery within the month. I just sat there, staring at the little gray and white ultrasound image on the screen. I'd come in for a routine check after weeks of dull stomach pain. Thought maybe I'd strained something. Instead, I was getting handed a surgery date and a warning that I'd need 4 weeks to recover. One of them basically stuck at home. By the time I left the office, my head was buzzing. I drove in silence for a few blocks before finally grabbing my phone at a red light and calling Lacey. She picked up on the second ring, voice flat. "Hey, I just got out of the doctor's," I said, easing the car forward. "They found a hernia. Needs surgery within the month. Recovery's going to be at least 4 weeks. I'm going to need some help the first week." I heard her scrolling, that little faint swish in the background, right until I said the date. "That's the same week as the NAPA trip," she said, like she was announcing the weather. I pulled into our driveway, gripping the wheel. "Yeah, I know. I figured you could reschedule." Her tone sharpened. "Reschedule? I've had that trip planned for months. Flights, tastings, hotel. Do you even hear yourself? You're being selfish." Selfish? I stepped inside the house, still holding the phone to my ear. "I'm talking about post-surgery. I can't exactly carry groceries, or—" "Oh my God," she cut in, voice going hard. "You're being dramatic. People have surgery all the time. You'll be fine. Hire someone if you can't manage." My jaw tightened. "Lacey, I just thought you'd—" Click. She hung up. I stood in the entryway for a second, phone still in my hand, hearing nothing but the faint hum of the fridge. I'd been with her 3 years. I'd been planning to propose. And the second my surgery interfered with a wine tour, I was apparently disposable. The garage door rattled an hour later. She was home. I braced for a real conversation. Instead, she breezed past me toward the kitchen, still glued to her phone, like the call earlier never happened. "You didn't even ask how it went," I said. She glanced up, eyes narrowing. "I already know. And I already told you. Don't make this a big deal." I wanted to fire back, to lay out exactly how messed up it was, but she just grabbed her keys again. "I'm late meeting Marcy. We'll talk later." The door shut behind her, and I was left staring at the empty space she'd walked through. My stomach ached, but not from the hernia. This was something else. I pulled the couch blanket around me, stretched out, and let the TV play on mute. The house felt colder than usual. She was somewhere thinking about wine flights and photo ops, and I was lying here wondering if I'd just gotten a preview of the rest of my life with her. It was after 11 when I heard her heels hit the hardwood. The door swung open, and Lacey walked in smelling like wine and expensive perfume. She didn't bother with hello. "So," she said, dropping her purse on the counter, "are you seriously trying to ruin my trip?" I blinked at her from the couch. "What?" She planted a hand on her hip. "Marcy and the girls think it's manipulative. You know exactly how long we've been planning Napa, and suddenly you have surgery that week. Convenient." I sat up. "You think I scheduled a hernia on purpose?" Her eyes narrowed. "You could have pushed it back, or moved it up. But no, you picked my week." I let out a sharp laugh. "The doctor picked the week, and I'm not delaying surgery because you want to drink Chardonnay in a vineyard. You're being dramatic again." She tossed her coat over a chair. "It's not even life-threatening. You'll be fine if you hire someone to help you. Plenty of people do." I stared at her. "You want me to hire a stranger to help me shower and get in and out of bed because you can't miss a wine tasting?" She shrugged. "They're non-refundable. And honestly, you'd be miserable if I stayed. I'd just be hovering, and you'd resent me." I shook my head slowly. "We've been together 3 years. I was planning to propose this summer, and you're telling me I should hire a home aide so you can keep your vacation?" Her expression didn't change. "I'm telling you this trip matters to me. It's been planned for months. I'm not canceling because you can't handle being alone for a week." Something in my chest went cold. "Got it." She grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge. "I'm going to bed. Don't start sulking. It's not a big deal." I followed her with my eyes as she walked toward the hallway. "It is to me." She stopped just long enough to glance back. "Then maybe you need to grow up." That was it. No good night, no question about how I was feeling, just a slam of the bedroom door. I sat there in the dim light of the TV, replaying every word. My stomach hurt, but not from the hernia. It was the realization that if she was willing to put me second over a vacation, she'd probably do it again, over anything. Eventually, I grabbed a pillow and blanket, stretched out on the couch. The cushions felt lumpy, the air colder than usual. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of her shower running down the hall. She was probably texting her friends, telling them she'd stood her ground with me. Meanwhile, I was lying there trying to figure out how the hell I'd misjudged her this badly. Around midnight, the apartment went quiet. I didn't bother trying to join her in bed. I didn't want to be anywhere near her. The glow from the street lamp bled through the blinds, making the room feel even more empty. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, shut my eyes, and tried not to think about how the woman I thought I'd marry had just made it very clear where I ranked, somewhere below a bottle of Pinot. 2 weeks out from surgery, I decided to try one more time. Not to argue, just to see if there was anything left worth salvaging. I sat at the kitchen table that morning, coffee going cold, staring at my phone. I typed out the words twice before hitting send. I'm nervous. I want you there. The dots didn't appear. An hour passed, then another. By lunchtime, I'd given up on hearing back. It was almost 4 when my phone finally buzzed. LOL. You thought I'd cancel Napa for this? Not life-threatening. I read it twice. The LOL hitting harder than the rest. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. Then I just typed, my mistake, and set the phone down. That was it. No more asking. No more hoping she'd change her mind. I pulled up my contacts and called Mark. He answered on the second ring, his voice loud like he was outside. Hey, little brother. What's up? I'm having surgery on the 17th, I said. Need someone here for the first week. You think you could come? There was a pause, then yeah. Flights from Denver aren't bad. I'll book it tonight. You sure? It's short notice. He snorted. You're my brother. Short notice doesn't matter. Besides, I've been looking for an excuse to get out of the office. I felt something in my chest loosen. Thanks. I mean it. Don't thank me yet, he said. I'm making you watch every terrible 80s action movie I can find while you're stuck on the couch. Deal. After we hung up, I went through the motions, emailed work, lined up a temp to cover my accounts, made a checklist for groceries and bills. Every practical step made it easier to shut her out. That night, Lacey came in late again, laughing at something on her phone. She didn't even glance at me. I didn't bring up the text, and she didn't ask about my day. We just moved around each other in the kitchen like strangers. She poured herself a glass of wine. Marcy found this little villa outside Napa. Says it's gorgeous. We might spend a couple nights there instead of in town. I kept my eyes on the cutting board. Sounds nice. She looked at me for a second, maybe waiting for me to take the bait. When I didn't, she shrugged and left the room. It hit me then. I was already done talking about surgery with her. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. From now until the day she left for that trip, we could coexist like roommates. Nothing more. When I finally went to bed, she was asleep, phone clutched in her hand, screen still glowing, probably dreaming about wine flights and cheese boards. I lay there in the dark, counting the days until Mark showed up, and telling myself that at least one person I cared about was willing to be there when it mattered. The morning of surgery, my alarm went off at 5. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulling on sweats while Lacey zipped up her carry-on. She didn't look at me until she was halfway to the door. She leaned in, brushed my cheek with the faintest peck, and said, "Don't croak." I stared at her. Seriously? What? It's a joke. She slung her bag over her shoulder. Mark's got you covered. I'll text when we land. The front door shut before I could answer. 10 minutes later, Mark pulled up in his pickup. I climbed in, and as we headed toward the hospital, he shook his head. She actually left? Yeah. Man. He gripped the wheel tighter. She's something else. We didn't talk much after that. By the time we hit the drop-off, my stomach was a knot that had nothing to do with the hernia. Inside, the waiting area smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. A nurse at the desk handed me a clipboard. Fill this out, and we'll get you started. Mark sat beside me while I worked through the paperwork. 10 minutes later, an older guy in blue scrubs appeared, short gray hair, sharp eyes. Name tag reading Pete. Your Turner, he asked. That's me. Follow me. We'll get your vitals and history. Mark stood to come with me. Pete glanced at the form in his hand. Looks like your emergency contacts a Lacey. He raised an eyebrow. Still current. I hesitated. Make it Mark. Pete nodded, scribbled it down without comment, then led us to a curtained bay. Once I was on the bed, cuff on my arm, he asked, couldn't make it today? Mark answered before I could. She's in Napa. Pete's brows lifted just a fraction. Wine country Napa? Yeah. Mark said flatly. Pete kept his tone polite, but the way he double-checked my ID band told me exactly what he thought. All right, let's run through the checklist. He was quick but thorough, firing off questions about allergies, past surgeries, meds. Mark stayed leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching. When Pete stepped out to grab a consent form, Mark muttered, "Guy's got your number already." I noticed. Pete came back with a stack of papers. Sign here for anesthesia, here for consent, and initial here acknowledging possible complications. I worked through the forms while he hooked up the blood pressure cuff again. You got someone staying with you tonight? Pete asked. Yeah, I said. Mark's here all week. Good, he said, making a note. First 24 hours are rougher than people expect. You don't want to be alone. Mark snorted. Tell me about it. I had my appendix out last year. Couldn't even get off the couch without swearing. Pete cracked a half smile. You'll be fine. Just follow orders and don't try to be a hero. Once the paperwork was done, they wheeled me toward pre-op. Mark walked alongside until they stopped him at the double doors. I'll be right here when you're done, he said. I nodded. Thanks for being here, man. No place else I'd be. Pete pushed me through the doors, and as they rolled me down the hall, I thought about the fact that my brother had flown halfway across the country without hesitation, while the person I lived with was probably boarding a wine tour bus. The ER nurse greeted me with a practiced smile, and Pete handed off my chart. Vitals are steady, history's clean. Emergency contact updated to the brother. Girlfriend's out of state. The nurse glanced at him, then at me. Got it. They parked me in a bright, cold room while the anesthesiologist introduced himself. As he prepped the four, Pete adjusted my blanket. We'll take good care of you, Turner. You just focus on breathing. I managed a thanks before the meds started working their way in. The ceiling lights blurred, voices muffled, and the last thing I saw was Pete giving a small, reassuring nod, the kind you only get from someone who actually shows up. When I came to, the lights were softer, and the room was quiet except for the steady beep of a monitor. My throat felt dry, and my stomach was wrapped tight under the blanket. Pete appeared at my side like he'd been standing guard. Welcome back. Surgery went smooth as butter. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck, I croaked. He smirked. That's normal. You'll be sipping broth in no time. Mark leaned in from the chair in the corner, grinning. Told you I'd be here when you woke up. I managed a nod. Thanks. They got me settled, ice chips in reach, pain meds dripping through the floor. I dozed in and out, catching snippets of Mark and Pete trading sarcastic comments about bad hospital coffee. Around 6 that evening, my phone started vibrating on the tray table. Lacey, I let it buzz out. It lit up again, and again, 10 calls in a row before the texts started stacking. Pick up. Why aren't you answering? Call me now. I didn't move for it. My stomach hurt enough without adding her voice. Half an hour later, the nurse's desk phone rang. I could hear Pete answering from just outside the curtain. His voice stayed calm. Turner? He's resting. Unconscious, technically. Only immediate family can get updates. There was a pause. Then he said, right, have a good evening, and hung up. He stepped back in and raised an eyebrow. Guessing that was her? Yeah. She didn't like the family-only part. Mark snorted. Good. It didn't take long for my phone to light up again, this time with a barrage of texts. What do you mean unconscious? Pete said family only. Are you dying? Why didn't you tell me there were complications? I'm booking the next flight back. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Complications? That was all her invention. Mark leaned over. She's panicking. I locked the phone and set it face down. Let her. Pete came by with a fresh cup of water. If she calls again, I'll handle it. You just focus on not ripping your stitches. The next ping from my phone was a flight confirmation screenshot. She'd moved her ticket up to tomorrow morning. Mark saw it and shook his head. So she bails for wine country, then storms back when she thinks she might look bad. Exactly. Pete chuckled quietly, adjusting the blanket over my legs. People have interesting definitions of loyalty. As the evening wore on, Mark flipped through channels, settling on some cooking competition. I let the noise fill the room, ignoring every buzz from the phone. Lacey could build whatever story she wanted in her head. I wasn't going to help her write it. By 9, Pete was making his last rounds before the night shift. Pain manageable? Yeah, as long as I don't laugh at Mark's jokes. Mark grinned. Lucky for you. I'm not that funny. Pete gave me a nod. Get some rest. You're in good hands here. I lay back, letting the medication pull me under again, my phone still lighting up beside me like a warning beacon. Somewhere out there, Lacey was probably pacing an airport bar, working herself into a frenzy. And for the first time since all this started, I didn't care. The night shift rolled in around 10, a pair of nurses with that mix of brisk efficiency and late-hour sarcasm. Pete briefed them, then left with a pat on my shoulder. Didn't take long for the first call to come through. One of the nurses, a tall guy named Rick, answered with a perfectly polite, "Good evening, surgical ward." His eyes flicked toward me as he listened. Yes, he's resting. No, I can't confirm that. Hospital policy. You have a good night. He hung up, grinning. That your girlfriend? Unfortunately, Mark was slouched in the corner, already laughing. Let me guess. She's gonna keep calling. Rick smirked. I'll keep a tally. She didn't disappoint. Midnight rolled around, and the total was up to 11. By 2 a.m., 21. The nurses had started betting on how high it would get before dawn. Every time she called, they kept it vague. He's resting. No updates at the moment. Family only. Each non-answer seemed to pour gasoline on whatever panic she was building in her head. Around 4, Rick hung up, shook his head, and said, "She's asking if you're in the ICU." I told her I couldn't say. Mark was doubled over. She thinks you're on a ventilator. I couldn't help it. I laughed, then immediately regretted it when my stitches protested. Ow, okay, no more of that. By the time daylight started creeping through the blinds, the tally was 38 calls. Rick taped the paper to the foot of my bed like it was a scoreboard. That's when Mark's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then barked out a laugh. You have to see this. He turned the phone toward me. Facebook, Lacey's page, a big dramatic post in all caps. Prayers needed. My love is in critical condition. Surgery complications. Please keep him in your thoughts. There were already 20 comments from people offering sympathy and heart emojis. Mark scrolled. Oh wait, here's my favorite. Someone asking if she's by your side. She replied, flying home as fast as I can. I shook my head. Unbelievable. Dude, she's writing herself into a Hallmark movie. I let my head fall back against the pillow. She left me here for a wine tour, and now she's the grieving fiancé. Mark grinned. Not fiancé yet, thank God. It only got better or worse, depending on how you looked at it. By 8 a.m., my phone was blowing up with texts from friends who'd seen the post. Man, are you okay? Do you need anything? Heard you were in ICU. Holy crap. I sent back a single reply to all of them. I'm fine. Surgery went well. Mark was still laughing when Pete came back on shift. He scanned the scoreboard at my bed and raised his eyebrows. What's this? Rick handed it over. 38 calls from Napa girl. Pete flipped it around to read, then looked at me. You want me to keep letting her imagination run wild? I thought about it for half a second. Yeah, let her finish her story. Mark was nearly in tears from laughing. You're evil. I love it. Pete gave a little shrug. Some lessons teach themselves. By the time breakfast trays came around, Lacey had posted another update. On my way to him now. Hoping I'm not too late. Mark read it aloud in a fake dramatic voice. Hoping I'm not too late. He dropped the phone onto his lap and wheezed. Man, you can't make this stuff up. I sipped my coffee, already picturing the look on her face when she found out the truth. By mid-morning, her Facebook feed was a soap opera. Mark scrolled on his phone, narrating in a fake news anchor voice. Day 2 without my love. Hoping for a miracle. Oh, here's a selfie of her at the airport, looking teary-eyed. Pete, who was swapping out my 4 bag, shook his head. That's the same woman who chose wine country over your surgery. Yup, I said. She's got some nerve, he muttered, then went back to work. The comment section on her posts was split. Half the people were sending heart emojis. The other half, not buying it. Mark read one aloud. Didn't you say this surgery wasn't a big deal last week? Another, weren't you in Napa yesterday? I smirked. Guess her PR department's slipping. By the time my surgeon walked in after lunch, Mark had a whole gallery of screenshots. The doctor checked my chart, listened to my chest, and gave me a smile. Everything went perfectly. You'll be ready for discharge tomorrow morning. Mark didn't miss a beat. So, no complications? Not in critical condition? The surgeon glanced at him, brow furrowed. What? No. Where'd you hear that? Mark tilted his phone toward him. Her posts. The doc read a few lines, blinked, then handed the phone back. Well, that's not a medical issue. He left, and Mark collapsed back into his chair, grinning. I hope she posts a dramatic video next. Maybe a black and white montage with sad music. Pete came in to check vitals and saw the phone in Mark's hand. She's still going? Oh yeah, Mark said. She just posted that she's rushing into his arms as soon as she lands. I let out a dry laugh. She's gonna be real disappointed when she finds out I've been sitting here watching TV. Pete adjusted the monitor. You want me to let her know you're fine when she calls? No, I said. Let her keep building her movie. Mark grinned. Tomorrow's gonna be fun. For the rest of the afternoon, the beeps of the monitors mixed with the occasional chuckle from Mark as new comments rolled in. More people started questioning her story, asking why she wasn't here already. She answered every one with some version of travel is hard when your heart is breaking. By evening, even I had to admit it was impressive, the sheer commitment to the role. She's gonna walk in here thinking she's the star of a tearful reunion, Mark said. Instead, she's gonna meet the guy who's already packed to leave with his brother. I shifted in the bed, feeling the stitches pull. Good. She deserves the surprise. The next morning, I was halfway through a bland hospital breakfast when the door banged open. Lacey stormed in looking like she'd just lost a race with a tornado. Hair frizzed, makeup smudged, sweatshirt hanging off one shoulder. Her carry-on bag thudded to the floor. What the hell, Turner? She snapped, marching right to the bed. Do you know what I went through last night thinking you were dying? I set my fork down. You weren't told that. You let me think it. Her voice cracked just enough to sound rehearsed. You could have texted me. You could have picked up. Instead, I'm stuck in an airport wondering if I'm going to make it back in time to say goodbye. Mark leaned forward in his chair, elbows on his knees. Goodbye? He had a routine hernia repair. There were never any complications. Lacey whipped around. Stay out of this. No, Mark said, calm but firm. I flew in to take care of him because you decided wine tasting was more important. You don't get to walk in here playing grieving fiancé now. Her mouth opened, then shut. She turned back to me. So you just let me be blindsided? You know what people were saying on Facebook? I held her stare. I never lied to you. You made your own assumptions. Her jaw clenched. You think this is funny? Not funny, I said, just telling the truth. I asked you to be here. You laughed and told me to hire a stranger. You made your priorities clear. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You're making me look like a monster. You did that yourself, Mark said. Before she could fire back, Pete stepped in with a clipboard. Morning, Turner. Got your discharge papers right here. He glanced at Lacey, then at Mark. Good to see real family showing up. She stiffened like she'd been slapped. I'm his girlfriend. Pete gave a polite nod. Noted. Now, Turner, we'll go over your restrictions. He positioned himself between us, running through the instructions while she stood there fuming. When he finished, I signed the forms and handed the pen back. Thanks, Pete. No problem. Mark, I'll have the wheelchair ready in 15. Lacey waited until Pete left, then planted her hands on the bed rail. So what? You're just going to pretend like I didn't rush back here for you. I pulled the blanket off my legs, careful not to strain. I'm not going home with you. She blinked. Excuse me. I'm staying with Mark for recovery. That's ridiculous. We live together. I met her glare. Not for long. Mark stood, grabbing my bag. You heard him. Lacey's voice jumped an octave. So you're punishing me? Over one trip? I eased onto the edge of the bed. Over what the trip proved. I needed you here. You chose wine. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Fine. Be dramatic. See how that works out for you. Pete reappeared with the wheelchair. Ready to roll? Yeah, I said, lowering myself into the seat. As he pushed me toward the door, Lacey trailed behind, muttering under her breath. Mark fell into step beside us, blocking her from getting too close. In the hallway, Pete leaned down just enough for me to hear. You've got good backup. Don't waste time on the ones who don't show. I gave him a quick nod. Believe me, I won't. We reached the elevator. Pete held the doors open, then looked straight at Lacey. Take care. The words were polite, but the tone made it clear she wasn't part of the team. Mark wheeled me inside. As the doors shut, I caught one last glimpse of her standing there in the hallway, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, like she still couldn't figure out how the script had flipped on her. She was on me the second we got to the parking lot. You can't just move out. We live together, she said, trailing behind Mark as he helped me into the truck. I settled into the seat, adjusting my jacket over the incision. I already scheduled movers for next week. Her mouth dropped open. You're serious? Dead serious. She gripped the doorframe like she might climb in after me. You're throwing away 3 years over one trip? Mark climbed into the driver's seat before I could answer. Not one trip. What the trip says about you. She shot him a glare, then looked back at me. I'll delete that text. The one about Napa not being life-threatening. It was a joke, okay? I met her eyes. Deleting it doesn't make it disappear. You still sent it. That's not fair. What's not fair is you mocking me for needing you there. Now you can pay the rent on your own. Her face flushed. Wow, you're just gonna abandon me? I almost laughed. You left first. Mark put the truck in gear, but she stepped back only when the tires rolled. You're making a mistake, she called after us. Already made one, I said, loud enough for her to hear. We pulled out onto the street. Mark glanced at me. Want me to block her number? Do it. By the time we hit his driveway, my phone was already buzzing with notifications. Not from her, from people sending me screenshots of her newest post. A long rant about independent women and emotional manipulation, complete with a filtered selfie. The comments section wasn't on her side. Didn't you go to Napa while he was in surgery? You really gonna play the victim now? Girl, you told him to hire a stranger instead of being there. Mark read them out loud until she finally deleted the post. I eased onto his couch, blanket over my legs. The quiet in his place, almost jarring after weeks of tension. Think she's done? Not a chance, he said. But who cares? You're here. You're covered. And you're not alone. I let myself sink back into the cushions, the first real breath I'd taken since this whole thing started. My stomach still hurt, but not from her anymore. Somewhere, she was probably rewriting the story again. Didn't matter. I had the real version, a brother who'd shown up without hesitation, and a mental note to send Pete a thank you card for playing gatekeeper when it counted.